Welcome to this Integrity lecture, which covers resumes, cover letters, and interviews. Please refer to your What Color is Your Parachute book for resumes, as well as the Sparks Charts resumes and cover letters, which is available as a PDF file on the Class BB site. Now, if you are truly serious about a specific job, you will need to tailor both your resume and your cover letter for that position, as well as preparing yourself, hopefully, for an interview for that position if you do obtain an interview for it. Now, the first thing I want to state about resumes and cover letters, and there are many examples given in that book and also in the Spark chart, but I've been involved in the hiring of dozens of people, and I can safely state these facts. There are usually many more applicants for a job, any particular job, and that's usually professional positions as well as other positions. Hence, the human resource person or the committee or whoever is in charge of screening these applications usually follows certain protocol. And so if there's one job and they get, 50 or 100 applicants, they cannot bring 50 or 100 applicants in for an interview. It would be a waste of their time and a waste of the applicant's time. So they're going to go through and screen those resumes and cover letters. Now, Dr. Tenkate says that only fools jump out of airplanes without a parachute, and only fools submit resumes and cover letters without getting someone who knows what they're doing to proofread them. And of course, I'm always willing to help you with that, as many of your professors are, or as well as the Career Services Department here at NKU is. Now, screeners usually prune the applicant pool typically by scrapping resumes and cover letters that have grammatical and spelling errors. And the reason why they do that is grammatical and spelling errors reflect poorly on the applicant's work ethic or the applicant's education, or even worse in their mind, their attention to detail. So, they want a person working for them who's going to have a strong work ethic, strong educational background, and can be very detailed oriented and organized, etc. Also, they're scrapping applicants that clearly do not meet the qualifications. So, if you're an historian and you're trying to go for a job in a neuroscience lab, doing research, say, obviously you don't probably meet the qualifications. Job ads, job announcements will list the qualifications. You need to be very particular in looking through those and not just applying for any job anywhere, because otherwise you're just wasting your time putting together a resume, cover letter, and sending it off. And hence, the reason why you need to read very carefully the job ad or the job announcement is so you can get an understanding of not only the position they're hiring for, but of the organization, the company, the corporation, or whatever, which is doing the hiring. Would you be a good fit? Is it a sales job, and are you just an extremely shy, reticent person who isn't going to be good at sales? Or are you preferring, if you can, to work at a large company, or do you want to work at a smaller company? These are all things that you need to determine before you spend the time and the effort doing a resume and cover letter. Now, some people have the opposite of idea of, we'll just have a kind of a generic resume and cover letter. We'll send it out, and we'll send it out to hundreds of jobs, and we'll see, it's just like throwing stuff, throwing peanut butter against the wall and seeing if it sticks. Most folks who are in this kind of field will tell you to find a job, you need to find a job that you're qualified for and that they're going to regard you as qualified for, and you need to spend some quality time putting together a resume and cover letter specifically for that job so that you can go in and then do an interview. Everyone wants to get to the interview stage. And so we're going to kind of turn now to the interview stage. So we're assuming that you've sent in this great resume and cover letter. You understand, what the position is all about, and they're calling you in for an interview. I think it's really helpful sometime when we try to understand people and we're going into a situation where we are not particularly knowledgeable about what might be expected of us, to try to see things from the person on the other side of the desk, from their perspective. That is, from the side of the potential employee. This website called The 4 Hiring Practices of Highly Successful Organizations, or this not website, but article, says that a study revealed that the organizations with the most effective hiring policies were more likely to use the following 4 practices. Job interviews in which candidates are asked to describe specific examples of their skills. We're going to go over that. Automated resume screening and search. Wow, which that means that you need to read the job announcement and you need to kind of include some of those terms, those key terms that were in the job announcement, because if some of this is being automated, then it's going to probably be searching on certain keywords. Assessments that predict whether candidates are motivated by the factors associated with a particular job or company's values or ways of doing things. We've already referred to that. They may have their own assessments for that. Large corporations usually do. Sometimes those are put together by HR, which is often very populated by folks that, have master's and doctoral degrees in human relations and in hiring practices. Many psychologists are in that kind of a field. Or simulations that gauge specific job-related abilities and skills. So you can't possibly know everything they might be using, but by preparing yourself fully enough and completely enough and doing your homework, you can prepare. Now, you should know that interviewers are not supposed to ask certain questions. So, like age. You can ask a person's age after you've hired an applicant. It would not be appropriate for an interviewer to really ask you how old you are. Whether you have children or not, they're not supposed to ask those kinds of questions, etc. Continuing on, these are a list of questions. Again, these are the kind of things that, you might want to be aware of in terms of your own rights. However, if somebody is not familiar, an interviewer is not familiar with all of these particular things, they might try to get by and ask you one of these questions. You just have to use your common sense as to whether or not you want to skirt the question. You might be very comfortable in discussing your age, your marital status, or whether you have children or anything else. But know that you're not required to ask those kinds of questions. And this is good for you to know because once you do get hired and get in a job, you may be on hiring teams. And, it's certainly good to know what questions you can ask someone if you're in that position. But just realize that some of these things are hot button issues. So, you may not want to throw things out there or to volunteer information that is not relevant to the job. your race, your marital status, your sexual orientation, whatever. It might be you might be very, very proud of all of these things, but you have to keep asking yourself, is it applicable to this job? There may be cases where it is applicable to the job. There may be cases where it completely is not. So be careful, what you want to volunteer asking or volunteer giving people, because they really may not be interested themselves in knowing certain things about you. They'll learn those things if they hire you in one way or another, usually over over coffee, over lunch, in other ways, if it's somehow appropriate or deemed appropriate. But most times it's not appropriate or legal at all. So you, the interviewee, surprise! Dr. Tenkate says that interviews are not really about you. They're about the organization and people doing the hiring and whether they think that you will fit in with them. There's a book, in fact, called, and it's just a little story, a business story, and it's very short, and it's called It's Not About You. So very oftentimes we get very nervous and say, oh my, everybody's going to be, focused on me, and I'm going to be a nervous wreck, and how will I handle all of this attention? I don't like all of this attention. Remember, there's a way, before you get too nervous and all of that sometimes the interviewer, or the interviewing team or whatever, the HR person is just as nervous because they need to try to discern certain things about whether or not you'll fit in with their organizational corporation culture and whether you'll be a good team player and whether, you'll fit in. And so there's just as much pressure, even more pressure on them. And so think again, and we're going to be recapturing this idea that interviews are not really all about you. Obviously, there's something about you or you wouldn't be being interviewed. But to see how it has to do with the whole entire team and the organization and how you would fit in with that. So it is about you and them. So if job interviews are about you and them, then how do you portray that? I always recommend that people be proactive. So if you come into a room and, there's going to be maybe 3 or 4 people interviewing you and they're not all there yet. And, they're starting to sit down. Maybe even before they come and introduce themselves to you, you can go up and introduce yourself to them. Extend your hand. Introduce yourself. Don't stand around like a bumping log. Show them that you are comfortable being who you are, that you're confident, and that you feel like you would really like to get to know them, right? And that's saying, hey, I know I'm being interviewed, but allow me to introduce myself. Be certain once the interview begins to answer questions in a friendly manner. Don't be afraid to smile. Smiles can certainly disarm many people. And, you don't want to be, like a laughing idiot either. But don't be afraid to smile. And don't monopolize the interview. They'll be asking your questions. But that doesn't mean, unless they say that it means that, like unless they really want you to go into great detail, that doesn't mean that they want 10-minute long drawn out answers filled with I, my, and me. They want shorter answers, and if they want to, they will follow up with you. So if you say, I worked at such and such a place and I did this, this, and this, they don't want to know everything you did, on a typical day when you walked in. And if they want to know that, they're going to specifically ask you for that. So you might give some examples of what you did, and then they'll say, that's interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? So let them guide the interview. Don't take over the interview yourself, and don't become boorish with your answers. And the most important thing in just about anything you do in life, whether this is true of your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, professor, whatever, the person interviewing you, it's important because we Americans tend to talk when we need more to listen. When we listen is when we learn. If we listen intently to where they're going with an interview, we may be able to discern the kinds of things that they're going to want to hear in our answers to their questions. It's all about being observant. Now, before you even go to the interview, you should research the company or organization where you're scheduled for an interview. You can check them out on the internet. They may have a web page. You can visit a local public or academic library and ask the librarian to help you find information. You might want to find out, if this is a privately held company or a publicly traded company. You might want to find out a little bit about their history, who owns them, what their net worth is, how much they made last year. These might be things that you just want to know for yourself, because they could be clues to opportunities and or problems. Then another part of your homework is to rehearse a few stories of how you achieved something using specific examples, how you overcame a hurdle, how you worked with others, how you developed a new skill or talent. Now, this could be in other jobs, and a job that you have now, and a job that you had previously. And, if you haven't had many jobs, but maybe you've worked on campus, you've had a work-study experience, or maybe you've been very involved in extracurriculars, something that shows you how you can work with others and how you learn and develop new skills and talents, especially how you've overcome maybe some kind of hurdle. So in other words, you're going to have in your mind stories that demonstrate your transferable skills. Now, transferable skills are exactly what they sound like. They're skills that are transferable between jobs and even between professions. So, at one time for 10 years, I was Director of International Studies at Thomas More College. I obtained that position partly because I taught world history. I had done fellowship in Japan, and I began to interact with people worldwide. I got involved in Sister Cities of Cincinnati and went to the sister city of Cincinnati in Japan, Gifu, and went with sister cities to the sister city of Cincinnati in Germany, Munich, etc. So I was building all the time transferable skills. My skills for years and years, being able to articulate myself, either in written form or verbal form, in giving talks, etc., as a historian and as a professor, those were all transferable skills. Getting along with my colleagues, getting along with students, making them, my colleagues and students, enthusiastic about travel abroad and about history. These were all transferable skills. So you see, just because a job you may be interviewing you for might be something, 99 out of 100 times, the place you're going is going to have to try to train you. Doesn't matter if you have PhD, an MD, MA. There are things that they need of their culture, their institution, their organization, their company, their corporation, that they do certain ways, and they're going to have to train you. So they're going to want to see how you'll fit in with everybody else in the group, and how you learn, and how you've overcome hurdles. These are your stories. Rehearse them. Have them available. These will come in so handy when you interview. Practice, practice, practice. Have a qualified friend or family member, or me, do a mock interview with you. The more we practice, you're not comfortable playing tennis or any other sport or game unless you practice it. Same way with an interview. You don't want to go in just, without practicing, without having those stories, without having someone go through it with you. If you're stumped by a question or thrown a curveball, I suggest the following: that you relax and take a breath and state something along the lines of, "That's a good question. I wouldn't have thought of that." Then go to your standby stories and see if something is applicable, right? Something that you can pull in and answer. Some people state that you can say, "Well, can I have a minute, please, to think about this?" I think that that's kind of a bad idea, because think of the people interviewing you. I'm just going to give you some, out there example. Maybe I'm coming in and I'm going to interview you, and I've had a really bad morning. There was a bunch of traffic on the way to work. People cut me off, gave me the finger before I even left for work. Say my spouse, was kind of cranky and argued with me or yelled at me. Maybe my kids were screaming or hollering. Maybe I get to work and I find that my desk is filled with a ton of things. And when I go home, I'm going to have to pick up the kids and fix the meal and do laundry. Okay, in an interview, you've got the interviewer's attention. If you wait too long to answer questions, there is a moment of silence, and if an interviewer is like me and a number of other people, they're going to end up taking all of those things in their mind and filling up that space. They're going to say, this person's thinking about it. Let me think. I've got to do this today. You've allowed their mind to start distracting them from you and your answer. So you don't want to get to the point where there's too much silence once they've asked you a question. Let them say, let me think about that. They can do whatever they want. And you should know that if they're taking their time, don't let yourself be distracted by other things in your day that have happened to you or that will be happening to you, because you don't want to distract them and they don't want to be distracted either. So go always with your standby stories. That's why you have your standby stories that tell you, what to tell them, what your talents are, how they're transferable, how you learn, how you've gotten over hurdles, etc. Those are the things that usually you can always come back to and pull something out of. And so that, in essence, you think you're stumped, but you won't be, because you've done your homework. Now, come prepared. Bring copies of your resume. Don't assume that just because you already sent them your resume that everyone will have looked at it or will have a copy of it or will even have read it in detail. They might have had a million things to do that day, and they might have just looked at your resume for 60 seconds. In which case, if they're like me or anybody else, they're probably going to need a reminder, and they'll appreciate that you brought extra copies of your resume. Besides, the more they see your resume and the more they learn about you, the better off you're going to be. Now, the big question. This is what I call the big question. This is the question that I have had in interviews. I hate the question. Everybody hates the question. But inevitably, many times it comes up. Not in all interviews, but in some interviews. What is your major weakness? I mean, they're looking for your strengths and they're looking for your weaknesses. What is your major weakness? Or they might say, describe a situation where you didn't handle things properly. Now, again, you don't want to turn the positive climate of your interview into a negative sort of thing. So, what you can do is turn it to your advantage by using one of your standby stories. Because one of your standby stories is going to be a story where you encountered a hurdle and you overcame it. So see, there was an instance where, yeah, there was a hurdle. Maybe it wasn't really your fault, but that doesn't matter. You know, hurdles are still seen as hurdles. And you overcame it. And maybe when you overcame that, you learned something positive from that particular situation. I always say, but I can say this, and this might not be appropriate for you, but, I would say if Harvard called me up tomorrow, which it's not going to, and said, we definitely need you here, but we want to know what your major weaknesses are. And I would say, something along the line of, in my 30 years of teaching, boy, I have really encountered a lot of hurdles, and I've overcome a lot of hurdles, and I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned a lot from my mistakes and from other people's mistakes. That might not be, you have to find your own way with this. But what you need to say and to accentuate is the importance of how you've learned from that experience. So have that standby story. Focus on the positive. Don't make yourself out to be some kind of bumbling, person who doesn't learn from stuff. They're less concerned about your weaknesses, but more concerned about how you make up for those weaknesses, or how you had at one time a weakness and you learn something from it and it's no longer a weakness. Obviously, we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, and then, tell your story and try to get things on a different track, or let them get things on a different track as soon as possible. You don't want to, just give them one darn story after another. Boy, I had this hurdle, and I had this hurdle. One's enough. They want any more, they'll ask for it. Keep things positive. Keep things optimistic. Let them know how great you are. Now, don't list. Don't arrive late to the interview. Leave plenty of time for potential traffic and parking problems, etc. No one wants to hear, oh, I'm so sorry I'm late. There was terrible traffic. There was horrible parking problems. The first thing a potential employer, an interviewer is going to think is, well, tough luck. Is this the way you're going to be if I hire you and I send you out to clients and you're supposed to be someplace at 9 o'clock? Are you always going to be 15, 20 minutes late? And if you are, what does that say about you? Does that say you just can't plan your time? You're not disciplined enough? Does it say that you don't respect someone? I often tell students, that you have to, again, put yourself on the other side of that individual. Let's say you're the interviewer and you have set up an interview with John at 9 o'clock. And you've set up an interview with Jane at 10 o'clock. And John comes in at 9:20. And by the way, you brought in other people to meet John, and you've had coffee brought in and, pastries. And by the way, the president of the company was going to stop in at 9:30 after you had gotten through most of the interview. you have just messed up that interviewer's entire schedule. That means that Jane might not be able to start her interview at 10 o'clock, or maybe he has some other meeting with the president or the board of trustees at 10 o'clock that he needs to get to. So you as the interviewer would say, that John is really disrespectful. He obviously thinks only about John. He doesn't think about me or about the company. Otherwise, he would have been on time and respected the fact that I've got a life and I've got a job and I've got things to do. So remember that. Whenever you think, well, it won't matter, it doesn't really matter to me, I'm kind of an easygoing person, it matters to someone else. And if it matters to them, then we need to respect their opinion. Be yourself, don't lie or exaggerate. People can see right through lies and exaggeration. The one thing my grandparents and my parents always told me is to always tell the truth. If you lie, if you exaggerate, you will be caught at some point in time. And then you'll have to do another lie to get out of it, and it'll just pile up and get worse and worse and worse until it's not fixable. Don't use I, my, me all the time. Instead, substitute those words with we and us when possible. Don't criticize any former employer or place of employment. You know, even if you worked at, the fast food place from hell and had the manager from hell, nobody wants to hear that, because the first thing they'll think is, I wonder if that job was really that bad, or that manager was really that bad, or John is just a griper and complainer and whiner and crybaby. And you don't want them to think that of you, right? You want to let them know that you're a team player, that you're positive, right? Don't go on and on and on about yourself. Again, this is the other side, 180 degrees of listen. And don't be unrealistic in your expectations. You're not going to get a corner office with a window and a secretary if you're just starting out in your career. And this is the stuff that I hear all the time from people in large corporations. And I have lots of friends and family in large corporations who do this kind of hiring and are involved in interviews. And you want to be confident, but you don't want to be, a jerk about it either. Everybody has to work their way up. Avoid distractions of your message. So don't let anything distract you or the interviewer from the message you wish to convey. Which brings us to our next slide. And as much as I would like to gloss over this topic, I can't do it. I have to be truthful, and I want to give you your tuition money's worth. Appearance is one of the many barometers by which potential employers judge us. Now, we don't have to be handsome. We don't have to be beautiful to get a job. Well, I imagine there are certain jobs where that might be necessary. But for, 99.9% of the jobs or whatever out there, that's not a qualification, right? But we need to try to at least look nice, work with, quote-unquote, what God's given us, and try to present an appearance of being clean and tidy, because that says that, like many other things, like being on time and being punctual, that we respect other people. Hence, if we really want a certain job, we need to dress the part, even if that doesn't necessarily sit well with us. Sometimes we have to dress in such a manner as to demonstrate respect for others. Again, an interview isn't all about you, but rather about you and them. Monster.com is a site that you can go to try to find jobs, and it also gives some really good interview techniques, and it gives some fashion tips for interviews. And Monster.com says, per the above website, for nearly all jobs in the corporate and nonprofit worlds, be certain to do the following. And don't do the following. Don't wear more than 2 rings per hand or 1 earring per ear, and no face jewelry or ankle bracelets allowed. This is just very good advice, so this is probably not a good fashion tip over here for an interview with, say, Procter & Gamble. After the interview, send a thank you note to those people who interviewed you. At very least, an email thank you, but maybe even a handwritten mailed one. Now, obviously, sometimes they're going to be making decisions. So maybe 100 people applied for the job and maybe they called in 5 people. Maybe they have 2 internal candidates. So maybe there are 7 people that they've interviewed. So they're probably going to want to get it down to the next stage where they call in people for a second interview. Now, if that second interview might take place in the next couple of weeks, then it might be sensible, provided you've gotten the cards, the business cards from some of these people, to go ahead and email as quickly as possible after the interview a thank you, because that says, boy, he or she is right on target. They're up with things. They don't wait around. They don't horse around. They're punctual. But there's another reason for sending an email very soon, even that day. It's because they'll remember you better. So if they've just interviewed you and they say, oh yeah, I remember Jane. She was the one that had that awesome history degree from Northern Kentucky University and talked about this, this, and this. If you send a thank you and it's within the next few hours and they open it in the next 24 hours, they're going to remember. If you send it 3-4 days along the line, they may not exactly remember you. You may not have stood out at that point among the other 6 candidates that were interviewed, and you want to stand out as soon as possible. So then they say, Jane sent that email. She's really punctual. She's very appreciative. I liked her. Let's call her in for a second interview. Now, you might even want to follow it up with a handwritten, mailed one as well to certain people, but that could take a few more days to get there, and it might have to go through a mail room, and it might have to get opened. And so if you do the email one, I would always do an email thank you, but I would also, in addition to it, perhaps send a handwritten one. It really depends on what type of an impression you want to give, how badly you really want this job. It never hurts, because you're going to be going out there, and the more times you interview and the more contacts you make, I know so many people, including myself, who interviewed for a job at a place once. So my first interview at Thomas More College, which was my first big teaching job, tenure track, did not get me the job. I was still not done with my PhD. They found someone who had a PhD. They basically said, we really like you, but I went ahead and sent all kinds of thank yous. And lo and behold, 9 months or so after that, 6 to 9 months after that, one of the professors in the history department was offered the job of being dean, academic dean of the whole college. And all of a sudden they needed to hire somebody, and it was like May or June, and they needed to hire somebody for August. Well, they got back in touch with me and they said, you interviewed very well. Now you're done with that PhD, or I was almost done, and we really need somebody, and we've already interviewed you and done a national search, and you stood out. You were our second pick. We want you to come work for us. So you never know. Don't feel bad if you don't get that job now. They might call you back, or they might offer somebody else the job, and that somebody else may have gotten a better job offer at a place that they'd more rather work at, and you might be the second or third choice, and they might come back to you. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like, oh, I can't stand them. I hate them. They didn't choose me. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's in the cards. In the end, it's what you do and how you present yourself, but it's also who you know. And there's also it's just a bit of a gamble. It's a bit of a crapshoot, like all of life is. You do your best, you prepare, you do your homework, you try to get to know people, you try to make a good presentation, and hopefully that will work. And if it doesn't work at this job interview, it'll work at the next one or the next one. And the more job interviews you do, and the more resumes and cover letters you do, the better and better you'll get at it, and the more and more confident you'll be, and pretty soon you'll have that job. Any questions, please feel free to email or phone me. I'm always happy to help. Thank you and have a good day.